WebEx sessions that we do with you guys out in the districts. Just that way, if you guys want, you can reopen the WebEx and rewatch everything that we talked about. Just if you feel like you missed something, feel like you need a refresher, you'll be able to reference back to the recording. So, I'm guessing none of the three of you guys have sat in on this presentation before, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, shoot, let me ask this. Do you guys, do any of you have anybody else sitting there with you watching? Or is it just each of you watching on your own computer?
Yeah, we're all at our own machines out of the same office. So.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so the only reason we're asking that is just so we know who to send meeting minutes out to. Okay, so the reason for the WebEx, and you probably have heard a little bit about this maybe from others, but the reason for the WebEx here is we wanted to give you guys a demonstration of some of the things that have changed around how we capture information with our PCC sample records. You know, all the testing is still the same. A lot of the data is still the same. It's just we're just capturing it in just slightly different ways than what we were just last year. You know, without further ado, I'm probably going to have Bob put you guys on mute while I go through my demonstration here. And I'll stop and pause at certain places for questions. But the reason we put you on mute is just to limit feedback. That way, if you choose to rewatch this, you know, hopefully I'm coming through as clear as I possibly can. You know, please forgive me if I stumble over my words and I'm hard to understand that way. But otherwise, hopefully I can come through clearly. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right into it here. So the first sample record you're likely to do for a contract for PCC is probably going to be your mix design. So that's going to be the first example I'm going to show you. So I'm on the basic sample data tab in Site Manager, and for the most part, everything you know about the sample record, you know, the first few tabs here is going to be the same. There's a few you know, minor differences or small differences, and I'll point those out as we go, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. Sample ID is going to remain the same as what you've done before, so you'll just you know, sequentially number that or whatever you guys do for your sample IDs. Then you'll plug in the date that you took the sample. So I'm just going to put in, since this is my mix design, I'm just going to use yesterday's date. And then for your material, if you know the code, you can type it in like that and tab out, or you can use the right-click and search to find your material code. For your sampler, again, you can right-click and search, locate the person's name or yourself, or if you know their ID, you can just type it in. Producer supplier, you can type it in if you know the full name and exactly how it's spelled, but this one is one I find it's easier to right-click and search, so I'm just going to pick on Alliance. So that brings us down to the product name field, and this is where one of our first slight changes comes in. So when you right-click and search on this field, and we kind of do a resort by clicking on the column header, you'll see that you know, we have a few more options in here. Previously, we would only note 47B, 47BD, PR1, PR3, so on and so forth. And then you'll see a few of the other options in there as well. What we've done to try to make use of some functionality here in Site Manager and to try to assist you guys in reducing the amount of data that you're re-entering all the time, what we've done is we've made distinct options for all the different classifications of 47B, 47BD, PR1, PR3. So you'll see that you now have 47B 3000, 3500, 3500 slip form 4000, and then you know, so on and so forth with the other classifications as well. For a mixed design sample record, what we're working on right now, you know, what I would recommend, we only do mixed designs for 47B concrete. You know, the selection that you make on a mixed design doesn't drive really any functionality anywhere else on this particular sample record. So as long as you choose a 47B, it's fine. But I recommend, or we recommend, that you pick, you know, the one that you feel most closely represents the concrete that you're submitting a mixed design for. Most of the time, I would suspect we're doing 3500, so I'm just going to use that 3500 for my mixed design for now. So I've selected 3500. And then geographic area, of course, you're just going to pick your district, and then If you have intended use or reported quantity that you want to fill in on your mixed design sample record, you can do so in those fields. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save now. And moving on to the Additional Sample Data tab, on this particular tab for a mixed design sample record, we don't have any expectations for anything to be entered here. You are more than welcome to enter information, but you don't, like I said, we are not relying on anything specifically here for reporting reasons or anything like that. So I'm just going to skip over it for now. Moving on to the Contract tab, you'll click New just as you always have. You're going to click your Contract drop-down and make your selection for your contract. I'm just going to pick on 1284. So since we only do mixed designs for 47B concrete, I only want to hook up 47B line items or line items I know that'll have 47B work on them. So for today's example, I'm just going to pick on the ones that are, clear right out of the gate. I can see that they're 47B. Certainly, some of these others, reconstruct curb inlet, maybe even foundation course replacement, other things, could be using 47B. But since I don't know the specifics of this contract, I'm just going to go with the obvious ones for now. If you're wondering how I selected the line items like I did, I'm just using the Control key on my keyboard. So you can make your first selection, press the Control key and hold it, and then make, just click and make other selections. You can also hold the Shift key to select an entire group at once. Hopefully that's not necessarily a new concept on anybody. That's something that you can kind of use in many different places just on your computer in general. Anyway, back to just my 3 items. I'm just picking those. For my represented quantity, not something I'm going to worry about for a mixed design sample record. However, not something to completely ignore as we will discuss it on the next sample record that I will demonstrate to you. Your next inclination is to click to the Test tab, saving first and then going to the Test tab. If you try to go to the Test tab, we're going to prompt you with this information box and ask you to return to the other tab to choose the destination lab prior to going to the Test tab. So for your destination lab, if you come to the other tab, you'll see that it's already been kind of pre-selected here for you. So all you need to do is right-click and search. And you'll make a selection of destination lab from one of the choices presented here. With a mixed design submission, we know that only the central lab reviews those mixed designs because Wally is in the central lab. So if I'm submitting a mixed design like I am right now, I want to make sure I pick central lab. So after I've made my selection and click Save, now I can proceed to the Test tab, and I'm presented with the Assign Sample Test window. So the Assign Sample Test window, you can see your available tests are on the left, and the tests to be assigned to your sample record are on the right. So you can see I have nothing that's going to be assigned to this sample record at this time. So what I need to do is make some selections. I find it's easiest to click on the test description column just so things resort, and it puts similarly named things together. And since this is mixed design, we have 2 templates that we actually need to assign to this sample record for the mixed design process. So the reason I did the sort is so the 2 mixed design sample records will appear next to each other. You might be wondering why there's two templates now instead of 1 template like it was previously. We found that it's easier to explain and we feel like it's easier for you guys to train on in the field if the responsibility of the template is clearly labeled or it's clearly known. With the old mixed design template, there was kind of the aspect of you fill out this part and then Wally fills out that part and then it's completed. By doing the 2 templates here, it clearly defines who's responsible for each template, and then it also just makes some allowances for some other things to happen for Wally to do some processing on his end. But for you guys, you're still only filling out the 1 template just as you always did. The only difference is you just have to remember to add both of them on the sample record. So I'm going to go ahead. I've made my 2 selections here. I'm going to click Add. They move from the left to the right. I can see that they're over here, and once I'm satisfied, I'm going to click Save Tests. The system will process briefly and return me to the Test tab. And then I simply just need to open up this template and fill it out just as I would previously on the old mixed design process. So you can access that template one of 2 ways. You can either go to the Services menu and hit Enter View Test Data, or if you're comfortable with doing keyboard combinations, you can do Control-Shift-V and that will actually open the template as well. So I'm just waiting for this to open. Okay. So, pardon me, I'm just going to put myself on Do Not Disturb here, disable some of those notifications. This is the new mixed design submittal template that you guys fill out. There's a few additional things that we're requesting here, as well as some things that should look familiar from the old template. The new things that we're requesting for filling out here, we do recognize that they are additional fields above and beyond what you did before. But the one thing to keep in mind about adding the information here is that we're going to try to, well, not try, we do make this information available on the later sample records that you'll do in the life of the project. So that way you're not rekeying the same information on every sample record. It just appears for you. So for the, just to get started here at the top, we have the cement section. And for 47B, we use interground blended cement. And then I'm just going to choose Ash Grove, and then making the selection of Ash Grove cement there. On my specific gravity, this should be noted in the mixed design that you received from the contractor, that Excel workbook. So you're just filling that out as it is entered there. And then your silica fume and slag, if it's noted, feel free to enter in some information for that. If not, you can just move past it. On the admixture section, if admixtures are noted within the mixed design, or your admixtures are known to you at that time, you can feel free to add those admixtures at this point. Don't worry if the admixtures aren't known to you right away. You will have an opportunity to add them to the proportioning record still. And you'll see that the different drop-downs for the admixtures sometimes contain different values. For instance, the first one is just our air and training agent. Next, we have our water reducers, accelerators, retarders, and another set of those. And then finally, we have our specific performance admixture. So moving on to the aggregate section, this section should look mostly familiar. We have our percent ag split fields here, and then we have our aggregate pit producer-supplier drop-downs. One quick note about the producer-supplier drop-downs is, if you remember on the old mixed design submittal template, we had an additional drop-down here for you to specify what type of aggregate pit it was. We're no longer asking you to tell us that. We now have the aggregate pit types in our reference data in Site Manager. So you'll notice that this template looks slightly different, or this drop-down rather looks slightly different. And we have all of our aggregate pits still sorting alphabetically, but first they group by the aggregate pit type. So all the ones at the top of the list here, we haven't clearly defined the pit type yet, so we're still kind of work in progress on those. But as I scroll down, you see that the ag pit type changes, and these become our aggregate pits for ledge rock. So you can see, then the other thing to note, so our grouping here, sorting there, and then once we start with our ledge rock, you can see I start back over on my alphabetical listing of the name of the pit. So if you're scrolling through the list and you're looking for a sand, gravel, wet, just scroll down until you see sand, gravel, wet, and then start looking alphabetically for the pit name that you're looking for. And then an additional field added here, very similar to cement. We're just collecting our specific gravity information at this point, which should be available to you on your mixed design documentation. So then I'm just going to go ahead and pick my other pit here. And I realize that some of my values typing in here are probably not legitimate. Please forgive me for that. And then lastly, on the bottom of this template, should look familiar. It's the target aggregate gradation, or tag. Again, you're just entering in the values that the contractor has specified that they're going to try to meet. The last thing at the very bottom of the template is the PCC mixed design located on-base indicator. This is just a kind of serves as a reminder to you, but also a confirmation that you intend to or already have loaded this mixed design, the documentation you get from the contractor, into OnBase. So just by checking that, you're acknowledging that, yes, that document is or will be in OnBase upon your completion of this record. So after you filled out all those things, you are done with the PCC mix design submittal. You simply can just close the template. You can add a date here to indicate your completion of that template, and you just wait for Wally's response on his authorization of the record. So I'm going to go ahead. This is one of my pause points here. So I'm going to go ahead and play the part of Wally, and I'm going to have Bob unmute you guys. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask those now. And it looks like Bob's got all three of you unmuted, so if you have questions, go ahead. No questions from anybody?
No, I think that made sense.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Not really a lot of changes there. Just a few minute things. So. So what you're seeing I'm doing right now is I'm just processing the approval like Wally would. Of course, he does some other steps in there, and I'm just pretending like I did all that and accepting all this. But this is the other application that works with Site Manager to help process sample records, essentially. Well, if you guys don't have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and have Bob put you guys back on mute, and I will dive into the second example or the second sample record I want to show you for this demonstration. Okay, so for the second sample record, this is going to be more kind of along the lines of your everyday sample record that you're processing cylinders or proportioning reports or whatever might be. I like to show this option just so you guys are aware that it's available. But if you're creating lots of sample records that contain a lot of similar information, you can use the services menu and copy sample if you are not aware of it. But by selecting this, what it'll do, if you are asked this, I always just tell it to create a new lab control number. But if you copy the sample, it'll copy a lot of the attributes about a sample record for you. So all you need to do is type in your sample ID, and then very likely going to change your date. But since this is still PCC, I'm still going to be the sampler at the same ready mix plant. Even my my product or my concrete classification, I'm not going to change for the sample record. It'll keep all that stuff for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. So one more thing about the concrete classification here. If I didn't specify it before, like I said, we'll want to make sure that we're selecting the concrete classification that matches the concrete being delivered to your project on this particular day or whatever day you're creating this record for. On the mix design, it doesn't drive any functionality, but on these sample records, it will change certain values and drive some of how some of the templates interact. So for this example, I'm just going to remain with 47B 3500, but just know that if you pick 47B 3000 or 47BD or BD 3500 or whatever, certain things will change essentially. On the basic sample data tab, one thing I'll note while we're here is the intended use field. If you're familiar or remember the old proportioning template, there was a couple fields or one field back there for you to specify a concrete structure. In order to simplify that template a little bit, we've decided to eliminate that field from the old proportioning template, and we're relying on kind of two things to tell us, what this concrete's being used for. One is going to be the line items that are actually hooked up to the sample record, and two, if you need to be more specific, other than just saying it's being used for these, this sidewalk, and you want to give some specific location information or some special notes, we ask that you use the intended use. We were finding pretty often that actually individuals, you guys in the field, were using both intended use and that field on the old proportioning template to say the same thing. So to try to eliminate the duplication of effort and entry, we're just eliminating one of them and just going to focus on, the one field. So that's intended use. Moving on to the additional sample data tab, if you previously on sample records, if you noted the number of cylinders on the additional sample data tab, we're no longer asking you to put the number of cylinders here. Rather, there's going to be one of the templates that I'll show you momentarily that will be noting the number of cylinders on. But like I said about mix designs, any of this information, if you prefer to provide it, or if you have the information and want to share it, you're more than welcome to fill it in. But it's at this time is not being relied on for any reporting or analyzing or anything like that. So, contract tab, because I used the copy sample feature, it also copied my line items for me. For my example here, I'm going to assume that I only poured sidewalks, so I'm going to actually remove these other two line items because I only want to hook up line items that are actually going to be represented by these cylinders. Okay, so now I've got it down to just my sidewalk line item. And I told you that I wanted to touch back on this represented quantity. Previously on the old proportioning template, we also specified the cubic yards of concrete. We're no longer specifying cubic yards used on that template anymore. Rather, we were finding that individuals were putting it here on the contract tab and on the template. So very similar to intended use. We've eliminated the use of it or the capturing of that information on the template and are actually encouraging everyone to use this represented quantity to specify the amount of material or amount of concrete, in this case, used on that particular line item. So, you don't have to give an exact measurement, down to, the thousandth, but, if they delivered, if they brought out a truck of concrete and, you can just kind of guess that they probably used about, 6 cubic yards. I mean, obviously you have to know how much you pay for, but I know that sometimes what you pay for, the line item unit may be paid for differently than the material unit. So that's where looking at this material unit field is a good thing to be aware of, because on some samples or some materials we sample it different than how we pay for it. Concrete is an example of that. We have a lot of line items where we pay for it by the square yard, but we actually do the some of the sampling and testing of it by the cubic yard. So in this case with PCC, and we're paying attention to our material unit, we're just going to enter in, say, the number of cubic yards contributed to that particular line item for this sample record. So I'm just going to type in 6. Okay, so now that I've got my one line item, I've got my represent quantity, I'm going to move on to the other tab. Again, because I copied the sample, my destination lab comes pre-filled out. However, if you need to change it, you can right-click search and select a different lab. For this example, again, I'm just going to stick with Central Lab and move on to the Test tab. So now when I move on to the Test tab again, I'm again presented with assigned sample tests. And many of the templates on here are carryovers from the previous process. The pavement maturity templates here, the person not listed, producer supplier submission, MIA cylinders, small quantities, those are all templates you guys probably recognize from before. But we've got a handful of new ones here that we want to go through with you today. So similar to the mix design templates or asphalt templates or binder templates now, the compressive strength average of 2, which is the new cylinder break template, also has a partner template or a paired template that they work together. So when you're doing when you're requesting compressive strength testing for cylinders, we want to be sure we're adding this template for the actual testing of the cylinders, and then we also want to add the PCC cylinder cast submission template, so you guys in the field can provide some additional information to the labs about those cylinders, such as number of cylinders, etc. The other updated templates include, the other templates available are going to be PCC concrete temperature, PCC percent air. We've got 2 different proportions templates, and I'll explain those a little bit more here in a second. And then also PCC slump. So I've got all my other new templates that I want to show you today over here on the right on the to be assigned side. When I was talking about the proportions templates, it's very unlikely that you'd add both of these templates together on the same sample record. If you do make the mistake of adding one and it turns out you couldn't use it and you need to use the other, it's totally fine. You can always add the other one if need be, and we'll work with you on getting the other one, canceled or put into a status that it won't affect anything or won't look like a legit template. But the two templates, the way they're designed to work is the PCC proportions mix design is intended to have basically values auto-populate on it from the mix design. And the one that says no mix design is essentially does not have any auto-population on it. It is all type in just like the old proportioning template would have been. And then the other templates we'll go over as we look at them. One quick note here before I click on Save Tests. On the two proportion templates, on each of them rather, you have the ability to record one error test. But if you get into a situation where you find yourself, you ran more than one error test and you want to document those additional error results, previously on the old setup you would have to add the proportioning template again and possibly fill it all out just to record an error value. So we've recognized that you don't necessarily always want to fill out another proportions record, but you want to specify more error results. So that's where the PCC percent error template comes into play. So if you've taken 3 error results and knowing that we can record 1 error result on the proportions template, we would know that this template would need to be added 2 more times because the template only documents a single error at a time. If we needed to add this template 2 more times, and you know that you need it 2 more times, you can click into this test runs field and change the 1 from a 1 to a 2. And then when you click on Save Tests, after it processes, we'll return to the test tab and see that I now have that template twice. If after you've gone through the initial test assignment and you determine that you forgot a template, or you decide, you know what, I actually ran 4 error tests, you can come up here to the button bar, find the Open Assign Tests button. Looks like a T. Click on it. You're presented with the same window again. The main difference between the first time you see it and clicking on it again is the second time around you are no longer able to add lab tests to it. So if you find yourself needing to add a lab test, you may have to reach out to that lab and ask and let them know that you missed adding a lab test, and just so that they know that they need to add it for you. But back to the example of error. If you know that you ran, a 4th error and you need to add another run of that template, or that you need another template for recording your result, you can click on the field up here, locate the Add Test Runs button down here, and then with the Add Test button, it'll allow you to add 1 or 5 additional runs of that template. And then it's also, if you've got templates over here on the additional available and you needed to add one of these, it's just as simple as finding it, clicking Add, and it moves it from the left to the right. Once you're done with making your selections, you can go ahead and click on Save Test, although I'm going to take that one back off. Sorry about that. Bear with me. There we go. I'm just going to add the additional error test just to show you. So you can see now I've got 7 of the error tests. Okay. So the next thing I want to show you before I stop for questions again is I want to go through the proportions templates. So the first one I want to look at is the PCC proportions mix design. Again, you can do Enter View Test Data, or you can use your keyboard command to open the template. And it's going to process here for a second. So once it opens, it will initially look like this. Because this template is only designed to work with mix designs that are created and approved under the new process, if you have a previous mix design, the yellow box and the label will not disappear. If you do want to make use of this template and you have a mix design that was previously approved by Wally, Wally has said that if you guys want to resubmit your mix designs, you're more than welcome to do so. And he will gladly reapprove them for you so you guys can make use of this new proportions template. So the first thing that we need to do with this template to get it so we can work with the rest of it is we need to select our mix design. So clicking on the mix design sample ID, I'm presented with all the mix designs on this particular contract. Now I've certainly created quite a few of them here just for testing. But this PCC 67 is the one that I just created a few minutes ago. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one. Upon making that selection, you should see the yellow disappear, and all the fields are presented to you now. Excuse me. There's a few things of note here that I want to reference before we dive into most of the fields here. The percent air min and max, the percent ratio, the min ratio, max ratio, and the target weight of cement are all values that are driven off of your selection of what classification of concrete you make. So if you were to have chosen 47 BD, these values would likely all be different. You can see that my aggregates and my specific gravities are all, populated fields or fields that will pull in from somewhere else. But we still have to fill out a few other values. So I'm going to work my way back up to the top here, and then we'll talk about each section a little more specifically as we get there. So starting at the top, the concrete and plant technician, delivery method, method of cure, all fields that carry over from the previous template, just maybe slightly in a different location. The next section is the air test section, and here's where you can record a single air result to go with your proportions results. So the air result itself, the time taken, both fields should be familiar to you from the old template, but the additional fields are the air test inspector, so this would be the individual who actually took the air, and then the stationing and offset information if you have it to provide. If this looks familiar to you, selecting the inspector, it should. We record our asphalt this way, and we record soils this way, and it all leads back to some federal reporting that we have to do to the FHWA for funding of our projects. So that's why we're adding it here as well. So that's the air test section. Bouncing down here to the aggregate section, because we already have defined our pits on the mix design record, we no longer have to specify them here. We're just simply going to fill out the wet weights and free moistures from the actual batch ticket that was, received by you. Moving down to the admixtures section, you can see I've got 4 admixtures here that would populate from my mix design, but I've also got some free type-in fields for mix designs. And then I've got my quantity in ounces for each. If you remember on the old template, we had a comment here that said, quantity in ounces per 100 pounds of cement. We're no longer asking you to tell us how much the quantity was per 100 pounds of cement. Rather, we just want you to tell us what was in the mix as a total. And if we need to do the math here, we'll do the math here to figure out how much went into 100 pounds of cement. Moving down to the next section here, we have our batch weights for our cements and water, and then also our specific gravities are populating. And then finally, we have all of our kind of calculated fields here from, these should look familiar from the old template as they were on that one. And then finally, the last thing on this template is the trigger calculation checkbox. What this field does is once you interact with it, i.e. check the box, it turns on some more of the auto-populated values, and it'll turn on all of these calculations. They're not populating now just because I didn't fill anything out for my wet weights and free moistures and batch weights. But you can see now my specific gravities are populating from what I entered on the mix design. But anyway, back to the reason why that field is there. Because this template has a lot of programming behind it, and we're trying to make a lot of this auto-populated stuff happen for you guys, we were finding that the template was starting to act somewhat slow, and we didn't want it to, too negatively impact your user experience of entering values on this template. So what we opted to do is basically add a switch to turn the calculation on and off. So what we've determined, or what we advise for best practice, is fill out everything that you need to fill out, and then as a last step, check the trigger calculation. You can look at it to review it, and then save it and move on. So that is the PCC proportions mixed design template. So I'm going to go ahead and close that one, and I'm going to very quickly or briefly pop open the other version of this template, which is essentially the exact same template, except for it does not ask for the mixed design, and the certain values or specific values for specific gravities do not populate. However, the min and maxes for the spec ranges will, as well as the target weight of cement per cubic yard. Otherwise, everything else, like I said, is fill-in field. So that is those are the two proportion reports. So I'll go ahead and have Bob unmute you guys if you have any questions, and then we'll move on to the other templates. So it looks like you're all unmuted. Go ahead and ask questions if you have them.
On that other tab where you select the destination lab?
Yes.
That would be the lab that's going to break the cylinders, correct?
Yes, I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't fully explain this, but yes, with with the destination labs, the way I advise making your selection here, it's either going to be the lab that's either reviewing the documentation for the sample record, or it's going to be the lab that's actually, like you said, breaking the cylinders in this case. So yes, you would probably pick, I'm sorry, I guess I don't know what lab you guys might be sending it to there, but if you're sending it to North Platte, then you pick the North Platte lab. If you're sending it to Grand Island, so on and so forth. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Great. Any other questions about what we've seen so far, I guess? If not, I'll go ahead and we'll motor through these last few templates. They don't take very long to do these last couple. I'll just go ahead and have Bob remute you guys while we go through them quickly. The remaining templates are the percent air, the concrete temperature and slump, and then the PCC cylinder cast submission and the compressive strength average 2. So I'm going to start with the percent air, slump, and temp. So the percent air template is kind of like I described earlier. It's meant for situations where you have taken additional air tests and you just want to document just the air test. You don't want to document a whole other proportioning result. And you can see what I have on screen. It's a pretty simple template, pretty straightforward, not a lot to it. You're just telling us who ran the air test, what the result was, time taken, stationing, and offset information if it applies. So that's for air tests above and beyond what you're documenting with the proportions template. PCC slump and PCC concrete temperature, both of these fields used to be on the PCC proportions as well. However, talking with Wally and doing some analysis, we don't really actually run slump tests all that often anymore. In fact, I think there's really only one thing we require a slump test to even be done for. So because it's not utilized all that often, we wanted to simplify the proportions template, and we wanted to put slump by itself. Just because if you're not using it all the time, we figured why present it to you all the time on the proportions? We didn't want it to lead to confusion and make you guys think you needed to be running slump tests all the time, basically. And then the same can be said pretty much about concrete temperature, probably utilized a little bit more frequently than the slump, but still we found that the temperatures probably only used certain times a year, but for the most part, like, if you're pouring in the winter or, early spring or something like that, and you want to know what the concrete temperature was out on the road. Those are the likely situations where that information is, or where that test is being ran and where that information is useful. If you're in the middle of July, probably not a lot of use for us in knowing what the concrete temperature was then. And so both of those templates, the PCC slump looks like, well, when it opens up here, you'll see that it looks very, very similar to the PCC percent air. The main difference being that it's recording slump instead of air. And then the PCC concrete temperature is exactly the same situation. Looks like the exact same template, just we're recording temperature instead of air or slump. So there's that one. So the last two templates I wanted to talk about, and I referenced it earlier, but they work as a pair, kind of like our mixed design or like asphalt or like binder, is our cylinder cast and our compressive strength average of 2. Because you guys in the field only really worry about the cylinder cast portion of this, that's going to be the one I look at first. So opening this template up, you'll see that once it opens, it has a very similar look to the percent air, slump, and temperature templates. You're telling us the inspector who cast the template, or excuse me, cast the cylinders, and then right here is where you can tell us the number of cylinders cast. So I'm going to change that to an 8. If you are requesting an early break, the labs asked us to add this here, as well as the age of the cylinder that you want, or the age that you want it broken at. And then, of course, the stationing and offset information, just kind of as a standard we're including. But the information that you select here on this PCC cylinder cast submission, if you utilize the printable sample ID tag, which you can get to from the basic sample data tab and clicking on the print label button, once everything has been filled out for the sample record and you click on this button, it will generate basically a printable version of the little sample ID cards that you're used to filling out and sending with a sample. Granted, this isn't as small as one of those. It's a little bit bigger, but it will basically populate all this information that you guys are used to handwriting now. And you can see here that we have our early break request information being communicated on this printable tag now that you can send with your physical cylinders. So that is, let me get back to here. That is the PCC cylinder cast submission. Number of who cast them, number of cylinders, and then if an early break is requested. The final template I'll show you, and this is kind of just for your own information, but the compressive strength average of 2 is what we call the cylinder break template now, or maybe previously known as the 4x8 template. But it basically is what it looks like. Each template that they add will represent a single break, and the labs will fill this out with the information as it applies. And then this information, just like the previous template, will be available to you on the the compressive strength of cylinders report that you're used to running in RUG. There's a new version of the report available on the report portal that basically it combines all the information from the past process and the new process and presents it to you. And let me see if I've got a version of that still open here somewhere. Oops. I'll have to run another one here, so bear with me. One thing about this new report is it runs probably, I would say, pretty significantly faster than the one in RUG. So that's one thing hopefully you guys will see a benefit in this new report in. Otherwise, the information being conveyed through the report, essentially the same information, maybe organized just slightly different. Otherwise, like I said, still telling you what your break strengths were and the sample records they came from. This might be where the changes start to come in. We're showing line items now, and then here's where your intended use and concrete structure information come in. So that is everything that I had to show you guys as far as the new process and how everything works. I'll go ahead and have Bob unmute you. And if you have questions about anything that you saw here in the past hour, you can go ahead and ask. Or if not, you're welcome to sign off the call, and thanks for joining. But you're all unmuted now, so go ahead and fire away with any questions you might have. Everything make sense to you guys?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So no questions then about any of it?
No.
All right. So like I said, if like you guys say, you're feeling pretty good about it right now, I assume. But if you feel like you do have questions, always you can call us and we'll help you through it. Otherwise, we'll make this recording available to you guys. Bob is going to be compiling the notes and probably sending them out to you, later today or tomorrow, with a link to the recording. We've got the quick reference guides we've sent out already this year. Certainly can reference those. Yeah, I think, like I said, that's all I got, guys. So if you are feeling pretty good, then thanks for joining, I guess.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.